I woke up with a very faint taste of blood in my mouth. I could feel the pain in my lung throbbing rhythmically to the vexatious ticking of that damn clock. It was accompanied by the dripping of my very own crimson liquid, clicking against the cement flooring. I had to admit, it was rather nice having this irritable sound, keeping my mind off my punctured lung, pulsing out my valued liquid with every breath. I had a strong urge to sit up, but I knew I couldn't. I quickly began to feel anxious. I needed out. I was about ready to do myself in when I heard the door arrogantly creak open, showing no remorse for my newfound headache. I tried to turn my head to see it. I let my head fall back into its original position. I knew that it was there, the abomination, that vermin. I could only begin to imagine what it wanted to do with me now. My last few minutes of life, and it was here to deprive me of a proper death. Its familiar stench corrupting my once clean lungs. Well, what's left of them anyhow. The date was February the 8th, 2009. This day was the day I spent laying impaled on what used to be my favourite pool table in a pub, breathing in my last breaths of oxygen. February the 8th, 1989 is the date of my birth. Something I've never thought much of. I've never had to. It was in 1989 that the vermin, in which the later I found myself given a formal nickname, the Screech, started to take a particular interest in me. Something was wrong from the beginning, although I was too young to remember any of this. Its illuminated yellow eyes have always stuck to me. Flash memories would be the best way to describe it. I'm sure you know what I mean by that. Nonsense, it kept its distance. I must have only seen it a few times, being in close care of my mother. My childhood lacked environment until I was the age of 7. February the 20th, 1996. It was at this point I had 3 dogs, all of which came from the pound. I thought to myself as a saviour. They were going to be put down, hence the reason I chose to adopt them. It was a month before this, January to simplify things. That's when my first dog had an unfortunate death. It would be so bold to call it a gruesome coincidence. Unfortunately for me, that wasn't the case. As I said, it was February the 20th. I was walking home from school, and I never took the bus. There was a large field I had to walk through to get to my neighbourhood, a childhood memory I was quite fond of, up to this date. It was lined with trees, caging me until I made it to the other end. I was moving at an average pace, but something caught my attention, a flash of movement in the corner of my eye. As a stupid, mindless, curious child, I looked over to see what it was, an action I'm not proud to say I do even today. As I expected, there was nothing there. It was just the line of trees, although there was an unfamiliar colour, almost a white blobbing in front of the tree. Being the curious person I was, I slowly made my way over to it. I got closer and it started to form a shape that made my chest drop. The feeling of a heavy-chested fear overwhelmed me before I could make out what it was. My imagination was already coming up with an answer. I continued for a few more minutes, and I stopped in my tracks. I wanted to run. I would have given anything to be home in that moment. My dog died a few months back from this point. Its body should have been decomposed. But here, its mangled body was hanging from the tree, bobbing back and forth. Its body was in the exact condition it was the day I found it. I stood there for a moment before I heard a crack in the bush below. My eyes quickly locked onto the familiar yellow eyes. The eyes slowly faded, and my vision darkened. From what I remember, I woke up in the hospital. I supposedly hit my head off a rock and was knocked out cold. The dog wasn't mentioned. I kept it to myself. I turned my head down to see the clock. I wanted to know the time. I wanted to know and remember what time I died, just in case there was an afterlife. The clock read 2:47 AM. It was a strain on my eyes to try to read the clock from here. I never could understand why everyone hasn't switched over to digital, for the ease of use. I could hear the abomination, skittering around the floor occasionally. It seemed to move in bursts. I was ready and waiting for my death, although it seemed to be here for the show. I was 14. I saw flashes of it quite a few more times since our last encounter with it. I was growing paranoid, starting to make any excuse so I could stay in the house. Of course, that didn't work as well as I would have liked it to. It was after school on the 14th of April that me and one of my many friends, Victor, decided to head to town. To sum it up quickly, he'd insisted that I go. I followed him to the bus stop where we waited for 15 minutes before this idea grew from bad to worse. I just wanted to go home. I remember examining the vulgar marker sketches from the previous teens that were here and the chewed up gum smeared across the less than cared for glass. When I decided it was time to leave, I remember telling him that I thought it was a bad idea, that I wasn't going to go to town with him. I had a few things at home I needed to do. Of course, he wasn't impressed. He argued angrily with me, started motioning his hands for a push. The only thing that was going through my mind was the dirty glass. If he'd push me, I'd press up against it, and I couldn't let that happen. With his arms already in motion, I had no choice but to press my arm against his hands and push back with all my force. He was knocked off balance. He stumbled backwards a few feet before tripping over what was once a beer bottle. He landed on his back, partway in the road. I looked up to see the bus coming. It came out of nowhere, and it was going too fast to stop for him. I remember how fitting his body was next to the corroding town. I dared to call home. It took a moment for me to get these thoughts out of my head and snap back to reality. His body was lying lifelessly, cutting off at his shoulders where the tyres did their work on him. My heart was racing. There were too many questions, too much that could go wrong. I felt like crying, but I also felt angry as well. I couldn't decide how I felt. When I looked up and saw through the windows of the now stopped bus, those goddamn yellow eyes. At the moment, I really could have used some rest. I'd do anything to be home, but instead, I spent my afternoon explaining what happened to the law enforcement and clearing the mess up. I got out of it easy with the truth. After the incident, it got much worse. It was growing closer to me. I started reading books, checking the internet. I did everything within my power to learn about it. I just wanted to be rid of it before it put me in an institution. Before it drove me insane. I found nothing. I snapped the end of the pool stick that clogged the hole it made through my lung. I set it down on the pool table by my side. Looking up through the hole in the ceiling, the stars were fading away. Morning was finally approaching. I could hear it making its way around the table. I watched carefully as it pulled itself up, finally coming into close eye contact with me for the first time. I could actually get a good look at the vermin. It was very similar shape to a human. It had long arms for its body though, and very large hands. Under the yellow eyes was a line of teeth that opened up into an almost circular mouth. Its skin was a greyish-white colour, and it looked pretty drawn. It was something only an artist with tools could create. The impressive dead-looking skin was covered with repulsive veins. It tilted its long, thin head, slightly tapping its claws against the pool table to the clicking clock. My vision began to fade into black, and my head could hear my brain making its last connection to the noise in its body. Tick, tock, tick. I could feel a nice comfortable surface underneath me. It felt like pillows, but the stench was horrible. My vision returned to me. At first I figured I was just waking up, like it would be any other day. Then my death replayed itself in the back of my head, or so what I thought was my death. The question was, where was I now? My eyes finished their recovery, to see a dark, black void above me. Even with nothing up there, a strange lighting was focused on me. I pushed myself up and jumped when I noticed that I was lying on a pile of human corpses. I started to scramble up to my feet, panicked. I intended to get out there as fast as I could when I froze, seeing that pile of corpses formed a path. Just like that day in the field, I was surrounded, this time, by what seemed to be an endless black void. I slowly pushed myself to my feet and took a careful step forward. I paused when I saw it on the far side. It almost looked like it smiled before climbing over the side of the bodies to the bottom of the path, out of my sight. Disgusting abomination, I thought to myself. I slowly made my way forward, the light focusing on something else on the opposing side of the path. I noticed the surrounding light followed. I didn't understand it. I took some time toying around with the light while I made my way down to the far end. It took me no more than 3 minutes of walking to arrive at the far end. What stood before me was a fetus. It was larger than normal and about 2 feet tall. It was floating above a stone pedestal, curled up with its very own spotlight, giving me a clear view of it. I continued to stare at it. It took a few minutes to notice it was staring back. It bothered me. It made me feel sick. I carefully reached out my hand when I heard a familiar voice behind me. All of your memories collected in one large fucking freak show of a room, eh? A familiar voice. It's been a while since I've heard this voice outside my head. I turned my face to my old friend, alive and well. He smiled and leaned back as a wall formed behind him, as it seemed to be there for no more than his convenience. I was speechless. He picked up on that and opened his mouth again. It's been a while? No hello? Nothing? Nope. Well, I personally wouldn't expect more from the guy who killed me. And let us not forget that we were friends when you did this. I opened my mouth to object to his accusation, but I stopped myself midway to see the vermin crawl back up a short distance behind him. What's going on? Where am I? I asked, dumbfounded completely. I had no idea what's going on here. He smiled, turned to a frown. He seemed disappointed. You did the impossible and certainly caused quite the pile of shit while doing so. He pushed himself off the walls and raised both hands out to everything around him. Can you honestly tell me you have no idea what any of this is? It's all of you. Even me. Well, what's left of you anyway? You're dead. But not all of this. But even though you're gone, you still have a problem. You see, I'm here as well. I'm not supposed to be, but here I stand. And all of this should have never come to be. You're in over your head right now. His rambling still meant nothing to me. I didn't understand what was happening. My interest was getting out of here. I looked behind him to see my way I came in, the path of bodies cut off by the black void. Look, I just went out. He stood there. He shook his head a little at my response. I don't know how to take it. Then, we both want the same thing. Simple enough. He raised one of his arms to the vermin and smiled proudly. This is the ticket out. For me anyway. You kind of fucked up. Well, something did. You're not exactly real, but you caused an impact on my life, and many others. All the ones you see here are your doing. You're dead, but that doesn't mean I can't go back and have everything the way they were. Not yet. All this has to be erased. In a sense, we have to revert you to nothing. But that hideous embryo behind you, February the 8th, 1989, the day you were supposed to die. Me and this friend of yours can fix the problem. If you don't exist, I'll live. I'll be disposed of here, along with what's left behind of you. But also, get a second chance considering the incident you caused will never have happened and will never taken place. Not even I will remember you. He seemed quite fond of the plan. He obviously didn't understand everything about what was going on here. Nonetheless, I didn't approve of what I was hearing. But what could I do? No, that isn't right. I'm here now. then I'm here now, so how can it be a mistake? It does. He knew what I was going to say. I guess anyone would have. He was already on it. A mistake is something that happens, which wasn't planned, it wasn't supposed to happen, and you have no right to judge whether you belong here or not, when you clearly don't. The vermin wandered off out of my sight, while he continued to talk, probably to fix the mistake, as he lightly put it. We all have a set life. We live and we die at set times. You managed to sneak past this somehow, and kill me and plenty of others along the way. Can you really be so arrogant to think that you have the right to live? Your friend who just left? He watches for people like you. He looks for mistakes like you and disposes of them. Understand? You can't live. And you won't. You don't get that much say in it anyway. The overwhelming burst of emotion came over me again. I wasn't sure how to deal with this. I couldn't just let them erase me. At the far end of the room, I could see the bodies beginning to fade. My world was slowly dying. I looked over at the ticking clock. I had to think of some way quickly to get out of this. I couldn't let them do this. Could I? July 11th, 2006. I was paranoid. I was seeing a lot more of the damned creature, and it was driving me insane. I was sitting on the porch with the last remaining dog I got from the pound. The second had died from natural causes. The traffic was a little more hectic than usual. I was throwing the ball for the dog and watching it run around the grass, grab the ball and bring it back to me, ready to repeat the process. I raised my arm ready to throw the ball again, when the eyes across the street gleamed at me. I paused part way through the action. This would have been fine despite the fact that the dog happened to see this as well. Like any simple-minded dog, it ran towards the interest as fast as it could. As the dog was doing so, I noticed the bus was coming down the street, rather quickly. I was sure the dog was about to get hit when the bus smashed on the brakes and turned, trying to avoid the dog. The dog was not hit by the bus that day. 36 people were killed in an accident. I wasn't surprised or bothered by the incident. I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. February the 8th, 2009. My name is Rufus. I died in the womb during birth from an unknown cause on February the 8th, 1989. February the 8th, 2009. My name was going to be Rufus when I was born. I died in the womb during birth from an unknown cause on February the 8th, 1989. February the 8th. My name is... I died in the womb during birth from unknown cause on February the 8th, 1989.